My parents scammed me out of $90,000 and disappeared. Then I found out my wife helped them. Now I'm suing all of them and filing for divorce. All of this started because of my parents, who scammed me out of almost $90,000. I run a chain of restaurants with a couple of my buddies from business school. It's a moderately successful business, and we make decent money. However, I had been saving up to start something of my own on the side and expand. Last month, my parents, who are 64 and 63, told me they were in financial trouble and needed my help to bail them out. Otherwise, they might lose their home and all their property. They told me that, apparently, before I was born, they had borrowed money from a distant relative of my father's, his uncle. My father had just started working when they found out my mother was pregnant with me. She had to quit her job because she couldn't handle both at the same time. My dad wasn't bringing home enough money, and they were struggling with bills, so they borrowed money from my dad's uncle and promised to return it in a couple of years. But instead of returning it, they continued to borrow for the first few years until my dad had a substantial income of his own. By that time, I was already in middle school, and they had a considerable amount of debt. They begged his uncle for more time, at least until I graduated from college, and then they would slowly start paying him back. But years passed, and they didn't return the money. My parents thought they were free of the debt when this uncle passed away a couple of years ago, but his son inherited everything and is now hounding them to repay the money or he will involve the law. Everything was off the books, so my parents hadn't been taking him seriously, thinking he would never be able to prove they had borrowed money with the intention of returning it. But a few months ago, the guy gave them a final warning and told them to cough up the money or he would file a lawsuit against them. It would be easy for him because he is well connected. That's when my parents started taking him seriously and tried to return the money they owed his father. My parents told me they had given him all they had saved but still needed $90,000 to be debt-free. They said they had already blown through their retirement funds and couldn't afford to lose their house and other properties, so they were counting on me. Like a total fool, I decided to give them the money because I didn't want them to suffer. I did ask to speak with the guy to buy more time, but my parents insisted he didn't want to risk it because he already had a short fuse. I trusted my parents and gave them the money. This transaction was also off the books, which was my biggest mistake. A week after I sent them the money, I realized I had been blocked everywhere. My parents were nowhere to be found. They had sold their house a couple of days after receiving the money and moved out without telling anyone. Their neighbors told me about it. I waited every day for them to come back, but they didn't. After about 2 weeks, I came to terms with the fact that my parents had scammed me, and I had lost my life savings. It was a terrible time for me, and the only consolation was my wife, who kept reassuring me that everything would be fine, that I was still working, and that I could always earn the money back and start afresh. But it had taken me almost 15 years to save up $90,000, and I couldn't imagine working another 15 years just to recover what I had lost. I tried to work something out with my lawyer, but I didn't even know where my parents were, making it difficult to reach a solution. I had almost given up when I received an email from my parents 2 weeks ago. They told me they were sorry they had scammed me and lied because it was actually a gambling debt they were trying to pay off. They knew I would flip out if I found out the truth about my dad's gambling, so they made up a story about their financial struggles to make me sympathize with them and extract the money. They were right, I probably wouldn't have given them the money if I had known my dad had been gambling and that's how they lost their money. But that was no reason for them to lie to me and scam me. They claimed they had used the money to pay off their debts and sold the house to move away because they didn't think I would want to be around them anymore. They hoped I could forgive them someday. The only thing I felt after reading that email was pure rage, and I instantly forwarded it to my lawyer so we could use it to sue them. But when I told my wife, she said it wasn't a good idea to go after them because they had been through so much. I couldn't understand why she was siding with them. They had stolen my money, and we had proof of it. We could get it back. We argued about it, and she told me I was being heartless because these were my parents, and they had just made one tiny mistake. She convinced me that I was selfish and that I should be more compassionate. She even argued that my father's gambling addiction was out of his control and that I should be a better son instead of worrying about the money. It was a frustrating conversation because my wife kept making it seem like I was the one in the wrong. I started second-guessing myself and told my lawyer to put everything on hold because I wasn't sure if I wanted to proceed anymore. After our argument, I began contemplating whether my wife was right. I wondered if I had been too hard on people. I almost believed that I shouldn't go after my parents and that the money didn't matter as much. My wife convinced me that I was being materialistic. A few days later, I accidentally came across a text on my wife's phone from my mother, and it changed everything. I noticed my wife's phone lighting up with text notifications and, out of curiosity, I decided to check her messages. I knew her phone's password, so it wasn't hard to access. I started reading her texts when I received one from my mother. I was shocked to find out that my wife had been in cahoots with my parents. My mother asked if my wife had convinced me not to go through with the lawsuit and mentioned that if I sued them, the deal was off. As I scrolled further, I realized that my wife had been working with my parents since they sent that email. My wife had initially threatened my parents, telling them she would take the text to the cops if they didn't return the money. But then, my parents offered her half of the money they received from selling their house to keep her mouth shut and convince me not to file the lawsuit. Heartbroken, I decided to take screenshots of the conversation and record the screen while scrolling through the texts, sending everything to myself. Then, I packed my things and moved out. I ignored all of my wife's attempts to contact me and called my lawyer to prepare the petition. I decided to sue my wife as well and filed for divorce. She kept texting me, saying she was sorry and that she did it all for us, but none of it mattered anymore. I couldn't believe she had manipulated me and lied for money. Even if I forgave her, I could never trust her again. So, my lawyer went ahead with the petitions, and both my parents and my wife were served. It took a lot of effort to locate my parents, but we managed to have them served in person. Since then, my wife has been losing her mind, begging me to reconsider the divorce, saying she made a mistake and wants to make it up to me. But I don't know what to do anymore. I feel like a jerk because I know I'm breaking her heart, but I don't have any other option. I spent 17 years with this woman, and she told me she was doing this for us, but I can't believe her anymore. I feel so confused. Refused I have for getting divorced from my wife of 17 years, because she was manipulating me into forgiving my parents. You can watch the second part by pressing share and more.